Welcome back to another podcast of Seeing Life from a Different Angle. I was thinking about it this week, as I do every week, about what to talk about today. And it isn't that there isn't a lot to talk about. Certainly psychologically speaking, certainly sociologically speaking, certainly theologically speaking, and philosophically speaking. Talk about today was something simple and straightforward, because I have this question. It's simple in its presentation, but more complex in its real functioning and the way that it affects human relationships. And the question is this: why is it that we tend to lean toward the negative when an opportunity arises for us to lean toward the positive? What I mean by that is this. I was thinking earlier this week about how it is that mankind tends to have two fallbacks. First is that we are critical. We're critical of other people. We're critical of politics. We're critical of religion. We're critical of the way people drive. We're critical of everything. And then the second is that we tend to cover our ass. And so it's interesting. Are they separate beings or are they similar? And I really believe that they are connected with each other. And what I mean by that is this. Our very nature is to want to believe that we are worth something. Now, in the beginning of life, as we've talked about before, when we are part of that wide open reality, we have no doubt that we're worth something. We're not even, the idea doesn't even present itself. Why would it? Because in order for an idea to present itself, oftentimes the opposite has to present itself. Eventually that opposite will be true, and it will present itself, and we will find ourselves being told or being shown in some way or another that we're not worth enough. But in the beginning, we don't see it that way. We see ourselves as lovable. We see ourselves as valuable. We see ourselves as someone that the world would want to embrace. But eventually, days, weeks, months, if we're blessed, years, we fall into that place where there is this measure of self-doubt. So now we've got this conflict going on inside of us psychologically. The one part of us would love to believe that we are worth something. The other part of us has come to believe that we're not. And it's not as simple as that, because there are all these other factors at play, and man's desperate desire to maintain the status quo plays a part here. But to put it in simpler terms, it's the idea that, we are split. We're split between the notion that we are worth something and the notion that we are not. But what ends up happening, instead of us saying I'm worth something, is that we do the negative. We come at it from the negative. We tend to be critical of other people. And the reason we're critical of other people has more to do with the desperate desire to say, and I'm better than that. We leave that piece out. And if we did include it, people would look at us and say, you're a terribly narcissistic person. You sound like you belong in Washington, D.C. But instead, what we do is just say, this person is this, is that, is the other thing that I'm very critical about. So how is this related to, pardon my French, or a way of putting this, covering one's ass? How do they even consider that they're connected? I think they're connected in this way, is that we tend to cover our ass because a part of our ego recognizes that the possibility exists that this other person knows what it is we're saying, why it is we're saying it. Because what we're saying is, Jane over there has ugly hair, or is too short, or is too tall, or whatever the case might be, or is ugly. What we're really saying is, I'm not. And we're fearful that this other person is going to recognize what it is we're really saying. Because in truth, they do recognize what it is we're really saying. If we really allowed ourselves, as we've talked about before, to see life from a myriad of different angles instead of just the 10% angle that we tend to see things from, if we could expand our scope and see things at a wider range, we would be able to recognize these things and see these things in others. We'd be able to read other people. And there are individuals who are able to do that. They are able to read another's conscience. They're able to see what it motivates the other person. Any good analyst, any good therapist, and oftentimes any good parent should have that ability to say, I see what it is you don't think I see. And so what we do, to getting back to covering our ass, is this. We may be critical of another person, but in short order, we're covering our own ass. We're saying something that kind of negates the notion that we would ever possibly think ourselves better than this other person. And so when it comes down to it, the reason I'm talking about this today is because it does represent one of the complexities of human life and how the human psyche functions. And I think it's important for all of us to step back and to examine that and consider, do I do these things? Yes, of course. Every one of you who is listening to me right now does these things. It's the same idea as if we could say theologically, every one of us is a sinner because every one of us does sin. Every one of us is driven by our pride to do things for ourselves that are oftentimes, therefore, by their very nature, not for another. And therefore, that is a sin. It is the gateway to all sin, as C.S. Lewis talked about. But the point here is to say, take that step back. Step out of your own eyes and see yourself. It's interesting. This week, my nephew had a daughter, and she was born just before on the 30th of last month. And my brother Lee, who is the grandfather, sent word around that the baby was born, but he also sent around a picture, and he said, I can't help but feel like that she looks so much like our brother Don. And Don had this very astute observation, and I thought it was hilarious at the same time, because what he said was, I wouldn't know I was seeing things from the other side. And I think it's one of those types of things in a quick, witted, interesting way to say, we do need to see things from an angle we don't tend to see it from. And if I can see it through the eyes of the other and see what it is that they're seeing, if I can see it in a way that is about them and not about me, I have a chance. I have a chance to see them, to understand them, to love them, and to be more connected to them, and in turn, be more genuine and honest myself. Be well.